Maybe not so close. A little back. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I get nervous when I have to walk too far. Hey everyone, Sarah Nova, and standing in front of our now mostly completed exterior addition here. We got siding on, we got a roof on, so a couple of doors, and we're going to be in business. And also a little plug for a fun event coming up this weekend on Sunday, the 22nd of September, 2024, depending on when you actually watch this video. If you're watching it before then and you're local, come on by. We're doing the Unity Car Show. We're actually just co-hosting it with some friends who are really putting it on. It's Volkswagen, Audis, and mostly Euro stuff with some other cool things smattered in between, as well as motorcycles with us out here. Food trucks, music. It's a good time. So around 10 o'clock a.m. is when it all starts on Sunday. So if you're around, please come on through. So the bike we're talking about,
Sunday,
22nd of September, 2024. So the bike we're talking about this time is a Suzuki Katana, first generation. This one is a 1983. 1981 was the first production year. And before you jump down my throat, this is a 750. The more iconic ones are 1000s, as you know. Oh, excuse me, 1100s. Everybody can jump down my throat. The Katana 1100. But this is basically a very, very similar bike. And this is kind of a really interesting thing that Suzuki did. You'll notice, especially if you look at it from the front, but even the side, it doesn't look like your average Japanese motorcycle. And it definitely, it definitely looks like it's 80s, but even for the 80s, it's pretty radical. If you were to compare this to, say, like a Honda Interceptor or something, even a Moto Guzzi Le Mans, this is a little more radical, a little more out there. And what's interesting is that this was designed by a guy named Hans Muth, and he was a German designer, worked for BMW. He actually designed BMW cars mostly, but he also designed some incredibly iconic BMW motorcycles, including the R90s. Including well, less iconic is like the R65, their short stroke one, had a very similar fairing to this if you look at those. I think he had a hand in the R100 Touring Series, those fairings and stuff. And most importantly, perhaps, is the bike that is very similar to this machine, the R80 GS, the very first GS motorcycle, was his brainchild. So strangely enough, this R1150 GS and this Suzuki Katana have common blood, which is kind of the fun thing when you start digging into the history of any kind of design, but motorcycles in particular, the kind of crossover they were doing. So in the late 70s, Suzuki contracted, they were called the Target Design Company, German company, and there was a three-man team that headed by Hans Muth, who took over making their universal Japanese motorcycle, the inline four-cylinder, into something different, something a little bit iconic. And this is what they came out with. It was a lot of things. It being the design it was, the type of design it was. This is a steel frame. This is still, even though this is an 80s bike, this is still pretty old school architecture at this point in time. This is sort of the end of the line for the steel tube frame, the cradle frame, just before box section frames come into play. And this was really the last time a company took a bike that was just a standard machine and made their sport version by just changing, the cosmetics of it, changing the foot peg position, changing the handlebar position, and the cosmetics, obviously. So changing exterior things and basically calling it their sport bike. Because as soon after that, the next sport bike from Suzuki, for example, was the GSX-R 750, the iconic bike which is still in existence today, but completely different, pure sports machine, and did not get derived from anything else as far as the frame and suspension goes, and even the motor was a major redesign of this motor. So kind of the end of the line for the traditional way of doing things up until that point. And after this point, sport bikes get very, very sporty. So it's kind of interesting. As far as the tech on it, it's high tech for its time, par for the course for its time as well. The 16-valve motor at this point. They had an 8-valve motor before. As I said, UJM, the Universal Japanese Motorcycle, across the frame, inline, 4-cylinder. Be reliable as heck by this point. Powerful, pretty darn powerful. And just a great power plant. The frame wasn't really up to handling it, as I just mentioned, but it was okay enough. The front forks, you have novelty for its time, the anti-dive mechanism. These were big in the 80s, the idea being that when you grab the front brake, it actually stops the fork from compressing too much to try to keep the balance of the bike a little bit better. They're kind of weird. They don't use them anymore, but that was all the rage in the day, and it's kind of cool to think about that kind of tech and what they were thinking about. Still using a 19-inch front wheel. That is really weird for a sport bike, and definitely goes in line with what they were. This is back to like a Honda 750 from 1969, 19-inch front, 18-inch rear. And that's really strange for a sport bike. Nowadays we're on 17s, much fatter. And soon after this, actually even during this time period, other companies were using 16-inch front wheels to try to experiment with better, quicker turning in, more agility and stuff like that. So it's kind of strange that they did that. But this was supposed to be I think more of a sport touring bike than an actual, full-on race bike. So other design things that are just kind of interesting. They were definitely thinking about things. If you look at the dashboard, it's a little more integrated. I mean, it's an integral speedo and tachometer, more than the average just 2 gauges, which is typical industrial Japanese stuff. And as we were talking about this, we realized that this has the tach and speedo in the same, in the same thing, and they move the opposite directions, which is kind of cool. And it harkens back to the Honda 305, which is another iconic machine from 1961 that had the same integral in the headlight, same thing, and the needles move the opposite direction. So I'm not sure if they were thinking about when they did that, but definitely seems like a little bit of a throwback. I think this machine is mostly stock. We are missing the windscreen here, which the owner has, where this is a resurrection. We've been going through it slowly to see, is it worth salvaging without dropping thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into it. And after a carb clean, it actually runs pretty well. And now we're going through stuff like tires and charging system and things like that. So we'll get the windscreen when we're all done with it. It's been stored really well. It's pretty darn nice for an original machine. Obviously, it's got some wear and tear on it and stuff, but it's pretty simple. Other than, it's mostly stock, except for this Vance & Hines pipe here. And funnily enough, we were talking and realized that I don't know much about the history of the Vance & Hines company. So if you're watching this and you do, chime in the comments. We'd love to hear that stuff. I know that they've been big in American motorcycle sports since the 70s, I believe. And their pipes are one of the best up there with Kirker and Bassani and stuff like that for getting performance. But I don't know anything about how they were formed and why, and who was Vance and who was Hines. So jump in with that stuff. We love that. So yeah, if you love this era, this is really, I always talk about the superbike era. This is sort of the end of the beginning of the superbike era. This is much more like a 70s machine than an 80s one, other than the styling and other than some details like the anti-dive mechanism on the forks. Still an air-cooled motor, still a tube steel frame, still couldn't handle much at all. You do have triple disc brakes, which is fancy for the time, but like I said, 19-inch tire, 19-inch front, 18-inch rear. It's really a 70s bike with that's playing dress up. Interesting time, and right after this, we get into the GSX-R 750, we get into the Honda Interceptor. Things really start to change fast, and sport bikes take off. So it's kind of cool. If you ever had one of these, let us know. If you're riding bikes in this time and you have some stories about it, we'd love to hear those things in the comments. We really do. So that's about it. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do, and we'll see you next time.